broadcast. There we go. All right.
So, okay, Tim just started. So we are recording now.
Attendees. All right.
I'll just keep correcting you guys.
Have at it.
All right.
Welcome, everybody. We'll just wait a couple of minutes as people are joining, and we'll start the program in just a couple of minutes.
Ann says we should talk about something.
Okay.
We can talk about my fire alarm, my smoke alarm going off for an hour straight.
I got a great call about divisive concepts today.
Ah,
Just a good reminder of who the allies are for upsetting that apple cart. There still are. They've got a lot of good friends. And we need to, this is not just about Democratic voices against Republicans. It's a lot of independent voices.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll see about vouchers. We'll see how many independent voices come for that.
Yeah.
One thing for sure, David, you're not going to get 6,000 people to your hearing, and I'm not going to get 4,000 to ours. That is, assuming your bills come over to us.
We'll see what happens. Some of them, I think, will.
Well, and it will all depend upon what the courts say about having remote access to hearings, et cetera.
What's the timing on that, Mel?
Well, you know, we're just waiting for the court to basically issue a decision, and then it's going to be remanded to the lower court for clarification, I'm sure. And at that point in time, they will add the issue of remote access to committees, because the current suit basically just deals with access to House sessions. But if it gets remanded, then they will add the issue of remoteness for the public and for those like myself who are immune compromised and cannot participate in in-person sessions.
Right. Sue knows that I've offered to introduce some legislation on access to public meetings, and I think the way that I'm going to approach it is through OPLC.
Yeah.
Where we ask our practicing professionals to contribute their time and resources, and we want the best of the professionals to administer licensure, hold hearings, pass rules, and to ask them to take a whole day every time they've got to have a meeting. And there are several outcomes. You get lousy board members, or you're going to get people who have special interests, or they aren't going to hold meetings. And there's evidence of all three.
Well, the Corona situation has basically created a whole new paradigm for engagement. And the question, not only for legislative issues, but for schools, for businesses, et cetera. And the question is whether or not the New Hampshire legislature and its Republican leadership are going to recognize there are different ways of providing access to information rather than just the traditional in-person options.
Yeah. I met with our city officials today, and they are really twisted up on it.
Tim, sorry to interrupt. I think, should we open the meeting officially, Tim?
Sure. Okay. I just want to say hello. Welcome to everybody here.
Tonight's presentation and program is about the truth about the educational savings accounts. For those who don't know me, I'm Tim Josephson. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Upper Valley Dems. And tonight our program is being presented by Mascoma Forward. And I'm going to hand it off to Donna. But just as an aside, I just want to thank everybody for their support of the Upper Valley Dems and our programming and all your local town committees. I'm going to put in the chat right here is our link to our Act Blue. If you enjoy this program and many others, please consider us with your donations monthly or one time, whatever you like. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Donna. Donna, take it away.
Thank you, Tim. So my name is Donna Pigeon. I co-chair Mascoma Forward along with Barbara Jones, who is here as well. And again, thank you everybody for joining the presentation today. We're really excited. This is going to be a great presentation and we're honored to have our panelists with us tonight. I'm just going to introduce our panelists and then we'll start with the program. And we are going to ask everybody to put questions in as you have them into the Q&A, and we'll have some questions toward the end of the presentation, and Barbara will lead us in that. So please, as you think of the questions during the presentation, go ahead and put them in Q&A, and we'll get to hopefully everybody's questions before the end here. So to introduce our panelists. So first we have New Hampshire State Senator Jay Kahn, who is in his third term representing District 10, which includes Keene and southwestern New Hampshire. He's made public service his career for 47 years. Dr. Kahn came from Illinois to Keene State College, where he served as Vice President for Finance and Planning for 27 years, interim president between 2012 and 2013, and adjunct faculty in management and economics. Senator Kahn is the Senate's appointee to the Education Commission and serves on the New England Board of Higher Education Legislative Committee. We also have New Hampshire State Representative Dave Luno, who has represented Merrimack 10 District, which includes Hopkinton and Concord since 2014. He serves on advisory boards at University of New Hampshire in Manchester and HTI in Concord, and served 12 years on the Hopkinton School Board with 8 years as chair. Representative Luno is co-founder and president of Class Company Incorporated, a technology company in Concord that develops and markets universal design telecom products. New Hampshire State Representative Mel Myler has a 48-year professional career in the field of public education. He has worked at the local, state, and national levels in educational policy making and implementation. He was a field representative for the Michigan Education Association. And in New Hampshire, he was the executive director of NEA New Hampshire for 21 years. And finally, our own Sue Prentice, state senator representing District 5, which represents many of our Upper Valley towns. She served as a member of Lebanon City Council since 2019, and then as mayor from 2017 to 2019. Sue is a professional paramedic and health officer and has served as chief of emergency medical services at the New Hampshire Department of Safety and as New Hampshire's trauma coordinator. So welcome to all our panelists and thank you for being here.
And to kick off this exciting panel, we'd like to open with asking how in the world did these so-called freedom accounts come to be in the first place? And we'll leave you to it.
Well, let me start. There were two bills that were introduced in the legislature. One was House Bill 20, which was the Dick Hinch Education Freedom Savings Accounts, and also Senate Bill, I believe it was 130, that was introduced into the Senate. In our Education Committee, I'm the ranking Dem on the House Education Committee. We had two hearings, 2 days of hearings on House Bill 20, and our committee basically raised serious questions regarding this flawed bill. And ultimately our committee basically tabled the motion. It then went to the Senate. They had a similar kind of a situation where they had hearings and it was also tabled. It should also be noted that in both of these hearings, because of the remote nature of the hearings, we had massive responses to people signing in both in opposition and in support of the bills. In the House session, we had over 1,000 people who basically registered their opinions, and about 800 or so were in opposition, and 200 were opposed. Similar kinds of things happened in the Senate, I believe. So there was a definite expression of opposition to this bill, this concept. Well, once these two bills were basically laid on the table, the Republican leadership then, in a kind of an unusual kind of a situation, basically took this policy, and this is a policy issue, and they slipped it into the budget without any hearings about that being slipped into the budget. And it was ultimately passed by both houses as part of the budget process. This was unusual because most of the time these kinds of policy questions are passed at the committee level in both the Senate and the House, and then are brought forward for a debate in each respective sessions. This did not happen. This is very unusual. And so the bill was passed, and we now have this this before us, and people are beginning to sign up for it. I know, David, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the issues that we're dealing with as far as in opposition to this bill?
Well, sure. And I don't know how much you want me to go into detail at this point on the various issues, because I think the string of how we got to here, there's more to the story that I think should be discussed too. But you know, Mel, you described it as a flawed bill. It clearly is that. But I'd go go further and to say this is the sloppiest piece of legislation, or certainly one of the sloppiest piece of legislation I've ever seen. And I think when probably Sue or Jay talk about the objections that even the state house attorneys for administrative rules had, it'll bear that out. But 2 weeks ago, I filed 9 pieces of legislation, not in certainly not in support of vouchers, but to try to address the sloppy and incomplete policy that's contained within the voucher statute. And one of those 9 bills is actually a full repeal of the statute. But the other ones are addressing significant problems. One of them starts with the student eligibility. And you know, most of the proponents of vouchers have talked how this really is geared towards families with limited means, low socioeconomic, limited resources, and to enter into the voucher program, family has to be income qualified, but only to enter in, only for the first year. For the remaining, could be, you know, 11, 12 years. You know, a student taking a voucher from kindergarten on. The family does not need to be income qualified in any of those remaining years. So circumstances could change. Parents could change jobs, or you know, maybe even for the 1 year of eligibility, they hid some income, only for it to come back in future years. So we would correct that and require income verification every year. That's a big one right there. Another one is to hold the program to the budget that's presented to the fiscal, to the finance committee during the budget period. And what the Commissioner of Education presented to the House Finance Committee for year 1 was a total cost for vouchers of $129,000. And I think barely a month into the school year, I think we've already surpassed $7 million. You know, most of these students, you know, although we don't know yet, but most of these students aren't you know, seeing education freedom counts as, oh wow, finally an alternative for me to ditch my public school and go somewhere else. Now most of these students were already somewhere else, either being homeschooled or private schooled, and this is basically cash right from the state coffers going to you know, families who are already sending kids to private schools. Anyway, those are the two biggest things. But we've also got bills in there for accountability, for misuse of funds. Other states that have voucher programs have had substantial misuse of funds, using vouchers to buy jet skis. New Hampshire statute doesn't require the Attorney General to investigate anything, doesn't even require the manager of the voucher program to report anything to the Attorney General. So I'm on a bipartisan bill actually to change the management structure of the voucher program, to revert back to the Department of Education, as opposed to using an independent contractor that gets to keep 10% of the state's precious education funds that go towards vouchers, and they get to keep 10% of it. So anyway, those are some of the big ones, and I think as we're going through the discussion this evening, they may come up again, but happy to take questions on them later on too. So Mel,
It's
was that all
important-
right?
Yeah, it's important to note that these are public tax dollars that are going to private and independent schools and religious schools. And as David said, the discretion is just, there is no discretion on how that goes. There is a qualifier that we haven't mentioned yet, and that's the family. David alluded to it, that you have to have 300% of the poverty level, which takes you up to about $80,000 a year. But our sense is that that's just a placeholder, and we're expecting legislation to come forward that's basically going to even lift that cap. So why don't we have Jay and Sue talk a little bit about what was going on in the Senate regarding this. And by the way, if I misspoke, the Senate did not pass this bill. I believe they just merely tabled it, and they realized that it was going to probably be snuck into the budget anyway. So why don't you two have some comments about this stuff?
Want to go, Sue?
Jay, I'm going to let you go because you're the senior member, and then I'll. Then I will.
Ouch.
Ouch! No, I mean senior member on the committee. My colleague.
I get it. Thanks. So first, let me put this into context. There are 29 states in the country that have some form of school vouchers, and New Hampshire has resisted this, and I'm not a proponent. I just want us to understand there's a national movement to divert public funds to support private and religious schools. And New Hampshire fell into this pattern this year and in the last session. But we've been, actually, the 3 sessions that I've been in the legislature, this has been an issue. This is the first time it passed. And it did pass in the Senate. We had that Senate Bill 130. It passed through the Senate, where this, and I agree with Mel, that this was extraordinarily unusual. This had financial fiscal impact, both on the local and on state resources. And normally that would go through an analysis that the legislative budget analyst would perform. That never happened in the Senate, to the Senate bill. So from the point of origin that it was introduced in the House, and then it was income qualified in the Senate bill, that hearing never took place in the Senate Finance Committee. So there was no independent fiscal analysis performed on the Senate passed bill. It was tabled by the Senate. and it's not that that's completely uncommon, but it always, when the bills get tabled after they've had some fiscal review by our finance committee and then passed, and sometimes tabled before they get into the budget. So this was unusual. We knew it was coming back in the budget, that there was a strong, this was the legislative priority for many of the new Republicans that were elected in 2020. And this is an ALEC backed measure. And it also comes from another organization called Excel. So
Jay, define ALEC for those who don't know, the acronym stands for
it's American.
Legislative Exchange Council.
Thank you.
It's a right-wing think tank that basically prepares legislation that would then be just put forward by a legislator.
And this was on their legislative calendar for this year. So you could go to their website. Actually, they took some of the stuff they took down. Anyway, so you got the context. The fiscal aspects of this were very, very disturbing. We currently have 177 school districts that rely on funds from the Education Trust Fund. Through the actions here to authorize private and religious schools to qualify, we're adding another 133 schools in the state. We also have draws on the Education Trust Fund that go to charter schools, which are scheduled to grow from 32 to 52. In sum, that's a growth from 177 schools that public schools that are supported with both local and state taxes. That we're now going to grow to 360 schools. Now, can you imagine now the competition among the schools for these students? David mentioned that there are private schools that currently enroll 16,000 students in the state that suddenly will see the potential for a windfall. One family member could drop their income so that they qualify in 1 year and have 13 years of public education for their student. That could be multiplied by more students, and you take that out, it's $50,000 of benefit over the life of that student in school. By the way, one of the issues that has not been tackled is this taxable income to the family. Because the family actually has discretion over how it's spent. So this may be taxable, and that'll be an interesting challenge as well to this. And I mentioned the Education Trust and the number of schools. We should recognize too that there's no prohibition to taking an education savings account and applying those funds to an out-of-state school. So not only is there the 10% diversion of public funds for administrative costs on every education freedom account, there's also the potential, and particularly this is true in my territory and probably in Sue's as well, where we have border towns that have competing private schools just on the other side of the river or across state boundaries. And I've had calls from people who say, I'm a supporter of public schools, but my daughter can't get a good education in our local schools. And I want you to make sure that she has the opportunity to attend a school in Vermont or a school in Massachusetts. And these funds are going against the Education Trust Fund. And the Education Trust Fund is a limited source from which the state contributes less than a third of the total cost of public education in the state. And these are dollars that are going to draw against the same funds that qualify New Hampshire as the lowest state for state contribution to public education among all 50 states. So that's where we're starting. And as David said, the fiscal estimates that we've seen are grossly underestimated. And the cap on this is going to continue to have an impact on how much funding we can direct towards public education in the state.
Sue?
Sue?
Okay, just checking. So I want to, I'm not ending the conversation, but wrapping this part of it by touching on something that all members of the panel have, well, they've touched on as well. And Senator Khan just, brought full circle that parent that said, I'm all for public education, but my child can't get the public education that they need here in New Hampshire. So let us all revisit the fact that it's been 30 years since the first Claremont case. And what we know, just kind of starting out at baseline here in New Hampshire, is that we still haven't solved the problem fully. And I know many of you, all of you were involved in putting together a plan to solve this problem, but we haven't fully addressed fair and equitable across the board for public education in New Hampshire. And now we've added a layer on top of that was driven by a partisan agenda. We have this layer that is moving money. The limited dollars that we have that are attached to each student are going someplace else. So who's going to make up that difference? We've all touched on this in one way or another. It's going to be the taxpayers are going to make up that difference. And it is going to vary from city to town based on their disposition going into it. So I just think we have to be mindful of that every time we have one of these conversations. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the next layer of this process, because all along we talked about House Bill 20, we talked about Senate Bill 130, and the mechanism by way that made it finally was tabled, it made it into the budget. There's a fiscal note or whatever you want to call it that really doesn't match what's ultimately going to be spent. But anytime you have a law like this that passes, whether it's in the trailer bill or not, there's rulemaking authority when is necessary is granted. And what that means is that the departments that work to administer these programs actually have to write rules, which are the policies and procedures that they've been enabled or asked to do by the legislature, and bring that to what's a joint committee on legislative rules. So you have members of the House and you have members of the Senate, and their job is to not decide on policy, because the legislature has already done that. So whether you agree with it or not, that discussion's over. But what your job is on what we call GELCAR is to actually, look at the rules that have been put forward and then turn to, and I think it maybe was Mel who brought this up, but we've all touched on it, turn to the attorneys that work for GELCAR, because they look at these documents in great detail and they look for alignment with the policy, alignment with the statute, and then they move and they make, I don't say they make recommendations, but they tell us, hey, you really need to get this area clarified. This could be problematic with existing law. I mean, they give you different directions to work on. So we went into this gets passed, House Bill 2, it's signed in what we know is the dark of night. And I say I have a predisposition as working as a state employee previously and having to write administrative rules. I've never seen a set come forward so fast. So what the Department of Education did is they filed what we call interim rules. They're good for 180 days, okay, regardless of what we do. 180 days, if they get passed on conditional approval, they are good. We came into this meeting and with 70 objections, written objections from legal counsel, not objections, that's the wrong term, concerns, points that they raised that they said this could be problematic for you. So here's just some of the most basic ones that came up for me were, can you, there's no background checks that are required for the education service providers, considering the same ones that are required for public schools here in New Hampshire, and they're receiving public funds. So what is the thought process behind that? What about discrimination laws? Will the education service providers need to abide by the same state and federal non-discrimination laws? What about a family who has special education needs and special education rights when they're participating in this program? Does that actually move with them? Because that's not clear. And there's a concern that they may have to forfeit some or part of that. We already know that EFAs are there for homeschooling, but what protection is in place for the scholarship organization to protect student and family confidential data? And is the data, or even, the policies, procedures, and internal workings as they relate to New Hampshire public dollars, are they subject to the right to know law here in New Hampshire when they're receiving those public dollars? This is still not completely clear. Myself and Senator Rebecca Whitley we sit on Jelcar, we asked these questions, and we were effectively shut down, and the vote took place, and we were well in the minority, because the decision had been, in my mind, what they knew was, if we adopt these interim rules, we can look at all these concerns that have been brought forward and do our best to address those in 180 days, and we can put this program on the road. So once again, just like the initial legislation, this was rushed, very rushed, and not well thought out. So I'm going to kind of sort of wrap myself at that point, because that's part of the end game of where we're at before we start talking about what's going to happen next session.
About a couple of clarifications. The Education Trust Fund has been referred to with this panel. And for those of you that don't know what that is, it is the fund that funds all state funds to local school districts. And it's also the fund in which these vouchers will come from. So if there's a finite amount of money that's available to provide for public education or education in general in the state, these vouchers are going to take money from that, which means there's going to be less money in that trust fund to provide state funding for schools, which then ultimately means it may ultimately increase local property taxes to offset what those vouchers are going to pay for. Sue also mentioned that we have not really dealt with the issue of education funding in the state. And both Jay and David and I last summer were on a commission that basically looked at that. We came up with a way to have a fair distribution, a fair allocation of those current funds, not talking about additional funds, but current funds. And unfortunately, the Republican leadership would not even let that report be heard by committees. At least in the House, we were unable to look at that, which would provide an opportunity for us to really look at a way of funding schools in a much different way. So that's unfortunate. Let's see, what David and Jay, are there other issues that we need to address here?
There's
so
I'm
many.
sure we could find, with enough time,
Yeah.
hundreds of more things to talk about on problems with the voucher statute. What Mel was just talking about too, that the commission that Jay and Mel and I were on throughout, it was more in the summer, it was throughout almost all of 2020. And I think we had close to 200 hours of meetings, but one of the things that became very apparent to the School Funding Commission wasn't just the inequities in terms of taxes, property taxes paid, in different communities across the state, but inequities in terms of the quality or in terms of the student outcomes that you have, and that's one of the big things. And I think Jay Kahn really put his hand on it, that hey, we really need to be funding schools in a way that helps to close these opportunity gaps and address the disparities that that exist between communities. And one of the things that that vouchers unfortunately does is move us in the wrong direction entirely. It doesn't move things in terms of closing opportunity gaps or addressing taxpayer inequity. In fact, something that has really flown, I think, under the radar in vouchers in the EFA program is that, let's say, when a student from Manchester exits Manchester to take a voucher, the Manchester School District will lose approximately, I don't know, let's say, $5,000 in the grant that it gets from the state. However, when a student from Wolfboro exits to take a voucher, whether it's private school or homeschool, Wolfboro doesn't lose anything, and that's because of the inequity, the tax inequity, and how we go about funding our schools. So and we've got there's a bill that's gone in to help address that as well. But people should be outraged at how the voucher program not just perpetuates the student and taxpayer inequities, but makes them even worse.
And I'd like to add two other points, and then if you want to open this up for questions, probably the best way to guide us. One is want to make sure people understand not only is it 360 institutions in the state that are going to be providing education and tapping the Education Trust Fund to support the education that they provide, homeschoolers get the same Freedom account contribution as any person's attending a school district or a private school. And the reason I want to bring that in, homeschooling, by the way, you got to draw on it for an education expense. It could be an online course. It could be an in-person course at a Learn Everywhere approved institution. So it doesn't need to be an education institution necessarily. It could be someone that's been recognized by the State Board of Education to offer an alternative to school education. It could be a music tutor that you use the dollars for. It might conceivably be travel to another part of the country or world in order to practice language skills. You can see where homeschooling dollars might be applied in a much wider sense. And this is called choice, right? Expanding choice and options. The other thing I want to bring in to this is there's already a program that the legislature authorized in 2014 forward called Tax Credit Scholarship Program that does exactly the same thing. And it was never clarified in the legislation or in the Budget Act that a person, a student and a family can't qualify for both programs. So you could get up to $5,000 of contribution from a tax credit scholarship, which is need-based and the same need-based qualification as there is for the education freedom accounts. And you could qualify for that and draw the $5,000 that David said you might be eligible for in the education freedom account. That seems like double dipping. Most people would probably call it that, but it was never clarified if applying for one program would disqualify you from the other program. And then it was never clarified, why is the education freedom account necessary if we already have this program on the books? And by the way, we're not tapping all of the tax credits for private schooling that are eligible on an annual basis. So, you know, that is just part of that vocabulary of this was an agenda that was brought and imposed on the state, not out of a matter of need, but a politically based agenda to shift New Hampshire as into the column of providing vouchers to support private and religious schools.
Any other comments from the panel? Barbara, how about some questions? Sue?
I just quickly want to say, Representative Myler, Representative Luno, and Senator Khan, you know, I'm the new kid on the block, but I appreciate the work you all did with the education funding study commission. I mean, that was a really heavy lift, and I think you did strong work, and I was disappointed that we couldn't even have a real discussion about it in the legislature, the discussion that it truly deserved. So just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Sue.
We will have that discussion.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I'm hearing. Thank you.
We're gonna have it.
So
Barbara,
let's
Barbara,
unpack
you're-
some of these questions.
All right.
And in no particular order, our Martha Rich asks, what do you think the GOP and ALEC see as the ultimate goal here? What's their long-term vision, or what's their short-term motivation for this?
Dismantle public education.
Yeah.
And then
Why?
take it to a larger picture. I know that seems like oversimplifying it. I'd be interested with what everyone else has to say, but this has been the trend. We saw it happen under Betsy DeVos and, you know, in the federal government, and it is just, you know, sweeping down into our state. It has to do with government in general, but this is one place. I'll stop there.
I think that the libertarians, that wing of the party, do not like government. They do not like, they want freedom of choice for everything. And that's been the agenda, frankly, of our commissioner. He's done little to help those underserved and at-risk school districts in the state that need some support. His answer to is just choice, 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 period.
Except where abortion is involved.
Right, exactly.
And Sue Almy asks, is there any way taking the money for private schools from the public schools won't force local taxpayers to pay the extra money that they're in their property taxes?
So I think I understand the question. So if a student in a student who's currently in a public school takes a voucher and exits that public school will lose the adequacy dollars that it receives from the state, and it could be anywhere from about $4,000 to I think close to $8,000 is that total range, and yeah, in that case, the school will lose the money that comes from the state that's connected. Our funding formula in the state is tied to student enrollment. So if the enrollment goes down by one student, then the funding associated with that would also go down. And Representative Almy is absolutely right. The incremental cost of public education for each student is different than the average cost of public education for a student. So I mean, it's you know, I think most people in business understand marginal costs, but you know, when you start taking the average cost out, yeah, that difference is going to be made up by local taxpayers.
And as Sue points out, almost all the school costs are already fixed. So what happens?
Right, right. I mean, that's Sue's completely right on that. I mean, that's the whole definition of marginal cost, is that it doesn't really take that much additional to absorb one more student into into the school population, and it doesn't save very much if one leaves. So yeah, so either the tax burden will increase, or in some cases the quality of education public education will decline.
So Rich Abel asks, what do you recommend the rabble to do? What should the citizens do? What can we do?
Go to public school board meetings and bring this up. We are unlike any other state in the country in our rate of state support to public education. And that's why property taxes are as high as they are in the state, is because we depend on 70% of public school funding to come from local taxation. And that's not going to change, because we're going to have additional taps against the education trust fund. So let's point to where the issue is. This isn't directly a property tax increase, but it is taking state dollars away from public education, and that I think is Sue's point in asking her question.
I also think too that we can't deny that there's a certain deceit that's come from the Department of Education on this program. Originally, they were only projecting 28 students. They're now projecting anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 students. And that kind of leadership from a legislative standpoint, to me, is just is unconscionable. And it's hard to basically have any sense of confidence in the department when it comes to these kinds of issues. If you look at a lot of the states, many of the states have the Department of Education being the administrator of this fund, where we have, from a legislative standpoint and from a public standpoint, we have some sense of accountability of how these funds are being spent. Right now, there is none. And that's just not right. It's wrong.
Right, and that you're absolutely right, Mel and Jay, and Rich's question, Representative Abel's question is absolutely on the mark on that. I think people should be outraged at the degree of student inequity we have, and what I mean by that is that we have. I mean, I'm sitting here at home in Hopkinton right now. And Hopkinton and Mascoma are fierce rivals, many times, and sometimes we're on top, sometimes you're on top, but academically, the average student in Hopkinton performs among the top group of students in New Hampshire, and the average student in New Hampshire performs among the best nationally. I mean, I think we're rated top 5, something like that, maybe right behind Massachusetts. And but it's just not true everywhere. In fact, all you have to do is go 20 minutes up the road here to another rival from Hopkinton, Newport, and the average student in Newport, Newport actually has the lowest average student performance in the state, just slightly below Manchester, and that's the 5th percentile. The average student in Newport and in Manchester, our state's largest school district, 13,000 kids, average student performs at the 5th percentile. We should all be outraged by that. We should all demand the legislature and the governor fix the system. And for the Commissioner of Education to say, oh no, I'm all about student equity, and that's why we're offering education freedom accounts. Well, first of all, that's not going to do much for the 13,000 kids in Manchester, or I'm not sure how many kids there are in Newport, but probably, about 1,000. It's not going to do much for them. A couple might take it, but that's not going to move the needle. The voucher program is not going to do anything in terms of improving student equity in New Hampshire. And people should be adamant and outraged that the legislature and governor need to do something about improving our public schools and not doing what Sue is absolutely right. Bring them down. That's what the governor, that's what the commissioner of education, and that's what this voucher program does.
One of the things that we looked at when we were dealing with the Education Commission, dealing with school funding, was to look at David's point is how do you deal with all of our kids, not just those in the local. I mean, if we want to have a strong economy in this state, we need to be concerned about all of our children. And you know, if a business is going to move into Manchester, one of the first things they're going to look at is, well, what's the incident rate of the graduation years? Where are they on the test scores, et cetera? Or if I wanted to create a new program over in Newport, what's that going to do? And so one of the focus that we've had is to try to look at all of our kids, not just those in Hopkinton, not just those in Concord, but all of our kids, so that there's some equity as it relates to educational opportunity. And that's what's really lacking here. There doesn't seem to be any leadership on the either coming out of the governor's office or the commissioner's office to look at how do we deal with these disparate communities to make sure that it's not just based upon zip code that you get a good education or a poor education or a poor education. So that's what's at stake here. And that's a threshold question when you deal with education in this state. And there doesn't seem to be, at least I don't want to be partisan here, but from the Republican standpoint, we just don't see that coming with finding some kind of a common ground to move that agenda for all of our children in the state.
So, oh, sorry.
Well, just this dismantling of public education, the wolf at the schoolhouse door, wherever your source of putting these issues together. The Learn Everywhere program was a diversion of students away from public schools. Public schools define our communities. Mel is exactly right. And there is an element of community pride in how we sell and portray our communities. There is no universal cost per student, but that is what the state of New Hampshire supports, is one universal adequacy grant per student in public schools. And what our school funding commission observed is every student, the cost in a district for each student is different. And we need to recognize at the school district level and at the town level how student outcomes can be influenced by the amount of money spent per student. So the other thing that dismantling of public education, look at the teacher shortage that is emerging in New Hampshire. And our critical need areas are just moving across the board: elementary education, special education, science and technology, and math education. We are going to be in the same kind of straits as other states in the country with a teacher shortage. And it's because people are not encouraged to go back into school as a profession. We've created disincentives and not shown the public consistent public support for our public schools. So I think that's part of the challenge. And the last thing I'd say is when it comes to school boards and local school boards, we need good people who care about supporting public education to be elected to those positions. That is another layer of unpeeling the support for public education, is low turnout, electing people who don't want the best for all students in their community and want to support this individual choice kind of agenda. That is a level of defense for public schools that is beginning to be eroded through loud voices, creating a hostile environment against public education.
And I think it's important to point out, just to tag on to what Senator Khan was saying, that why, teaching jobs used to be some of the most coveted, important, and actually, it's the great equalizers, education. Okay. And they must be some of the most coveted positions or jobs that you could get coming out of college, and then, going to get your, moving towards your master's degree. But if you're in education now, or looking into going into education now, and especially in a state like New Hampshire, which we all love, or we wouldn't be here, you're watching the system be dismantled. You're watching the fact that, there's still this inequity across the board that's never been dealt with. And then the teachers, I'll just add on to this, and the staff and the faculty are dealing with all of these issues. It almost feels like a custody battle around COVID-19 every single day. And so one thing compounds the other. And I actually see help wanted signs out in front of SAUs. And I don't remember ever in my lifetime living in New Hampshire seeing like a banner that says help wanted out in front of an SAU. These are the most important roles in shaping our communities. What are we doing? I think we all know what we're doing, but that's the question to ask.
Well, I think that more on a general issue is that schools have been the bedrock of democracy, and it provides the common good. And I think from a cultural standpoint, we are moving away from the concept of the common good to the individual choice, whether it be masks, whether it be vaccines, whether it be where I want to have my kid go to school with a public voucher. And I think that's unfortunate. And it's a threshold question that I think more conversation needs to take place, because without the common good as the focus, I think our democracy and public education is really potentially in peril here.
No doubt.
I don't mean to be a downer here, but it's a problem.
So we have 3 minutes left. We have tons of questions, but I think we'd better start wrapping it up if we want to close at 7. And I know there are other meetings people want to get to. And this is, you've already gotten a lot of thanks for this panel, and thank you so much for helping us understand this horrible nightmare. Can we, does anyone want to give us some final thoughts, and then we'll sign off?
Real quick, Barbara, just before they do that, here, let's do my video. I just wanted, just on the questions, I think there's a few that we can just quickly scroll through. Like, for example, there, are private schools or charter schools required to follow, state curriculums, or their teachers certified, testing of curriculums? They're not, nothing like that. I just want to make sure we address that this is money going straight to private schools that have none of the same standards.
So just to be clear, Tim, charters do have to follow some of the requirements, and I think 20% or 30% of the teachers have to be credentialed by the department. But it's the wild west when it comes to Learn Everywhere program, vouchers, stuff like that. For example, and my kids played soccer, so nothing wrong with soccer. We were not members of Seacoast United, but Seacoast United is actually accredited by the department, by the commissioner, to be an education service provider. I'm not quite sure what the State Board of Education is thinking when we're moving in that way.
Yeah.
I'm
And just,
wondering, go ahead, Tim.
just real quick, just to let you guys know that you may not have known this, but I received a push poll on the phone asking about the Learn Everywhere program, and it was very slanted to ask why wouldn't I be in favor of kids learning anywhere they possibly could. So I just found that to be very interesting. I received that over the summer.
Well, it's
So-
interesting though, Tim, on that Learn Everywhere, not to get into that debate too, but there already were programs in schools that provided opportunities for students to
Mhm.
seek alternate, along with their regular curriculum, to get some live experience outside the school. And the commissioner, in fact, David and I met with him, and the commissioner just wouldn't even look at what's already there. He wanted something new.
Yeah.
Again, this is his agenda, not really trying to cooperate with the school people to create those kinds of opportunities.
Yeah, extended learning opportunities, ELOs. They're available at your public school.
Mhm.
I'm wondering as well, because we do have a lot of questions, if we might impose on our panelists that perhaps if we could email the questions to you and then we could get them out to folks, would that be all right if we did that?
Yep. I saw one about Prenda and Jelka. I'd be happy to answer. So
Oh,
Great.
good.
fire
We'll
away.
get you all
Yeah.
the questions. Great.
Yeah.
Thank
I'm
you.
gonna-
Thank you.
Thank you.
I
Thanks
wanted
for the
to make sure,
invitation.
Thank you for the
questions.
opportunity to have this conversation.
And remember, Democrats can win on education issues. So let's keep each other informed and answer the questions that people need.
Barbara, Donna, Tim, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
all
you.
you.
Thank
Joining us.
you. This has been
Feel
so
much.
informative.
Go to your local school board meetings, contact your local representatives, contact your senators. All right. Anything else, anybody?
Have a good evening.
All
Go,
right.
go Mascoma.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for everything.
Go
Thank you for
Raiders, go
everything
Never
you're
said
doing
that
for
before.
us. Thank you, one and all.
Stevens.
Thank you.